Welcome everyone. It is such a pleasure to be here. Um, I'm going to just check if we don't have anyone else in the waiting room. We don't. So I guess I'm just gonna jump right into it. I'm Anastasia Berg. I'm an assistant professor of philosophy at the University of California, Irvine, and a senior editor of The Point magazine, which is a magazine of philosophical writing about everyday life, politics, and the arts. That's it about me. Because it is my pleasure and great honor to welcome Professor Jennifer Frey for a conversation about the future of the humanities. We're going to be talking about their real value, and we're going to be talking about what it would take to protect that value today. So, Jennifer Frey is a professor of philosophy in the Department of Philosophy and Religion at the University of Tulsa. But until very recently, she was serving as the dean of the Honors College at the University of Tulsa, a position that was liquefied when new higher administration decided to quote unquote restructure the college. As the dean of the Honors College, which was uniquely dedicated to the study of a classical liberal arts curriculum. Sorry, I'll just gonna remind everyone to please mute our microphones. Thank you so much. I can still hear someone. Thank you. So please just mute your microphones and we'll have an opportunity to unmute them really soon when we turn the floor over to you. So as I was saying, this position was liquefied, but Professor Jen Frey enjoyed tremendous success as the dean of the college. The college saw a staggering increase in enrollment, retention, and very importantly, fundraising for the college, leading her to conclude provocatively in a New York Times op-ed that we are thinking about the decline in the humanities in all the wrong ways. The humanities, she argued, are suffering not on account of lack of student interest and not even on account of the lack of donor interest, but on account of a kind of lack of internal support from the very heart of universities, namely the university leadership. In the case of the Tulsa Honors College, this was the Board of Trustees and the admin class who proved themselves to be uninterested in the liberal arts. These are the themes, these internal contradictions and tensions within universities that make them inhospitable to the humanities or the liberal arts are the themes that we're going to be talking about today. But before we do so, I think it is worth saying just a few more brief words about Professor Frey's background. First, her own illustrious past through American academic institutions grounds, in a very important way, her authority on these students. The path that she took as a student, researcher, and teacher of the liberal arts involved close-hand experience with the nation's full range of institutions of higher learning, from Indiana University in Bloomington, where she completed her undergraduate studies in philosophy, medieval studies, and classics, to the University of Pittsburgh, where she wrote her PhD in philosophy, and then going on to the University of Chicago and the University of South Carolina, where she held an endowed chair in philosophy prior to moving to Tulsa to lead the Honors College there. And this practical experience is complemented by her unique intellectual activity. Her academic research in moral philosophy focuses, for the most part, on moral psychology and virtue, the kind of interest that then grounded her work as an educator and administrator. And she herself has written extensively in public venues like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, First Things, and our own magazine, The Point. And then last but not least, she hosts a terrific philosophy, theology, and literature podcast called Sacred and Profane Love. So welcome back to Intellect, Jen.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Looking forward to the conversation.
I am as well. So what we're going to do today is we're going to spend about 20 minutes of me asking Jen a few questions, and then we're going to turn it over to you because I know that people have been very, very eager to join this conversation. When you do ask a question or make a comment, please feel free to introduce yourself. If you want to tell us what brings you here today, what fuels your interest in this topic, we would love to hear from you. You are also very welcome to ask a question in the chat that can help me see what question could be presented at what order. And when you do that, again, just feel free to say what brings you here if you are so moved. Now, without further ado, let me begin by asking you, Jen, the following. I want to first understand how we got to inhabit the kind of educational, institutional situation that we do. Let's make that a little bit more concrete. When we say the humanities, today, we're referring, however obliquely, to two things, or so it seems to me. You'll tell me if this description seems right to you. In the American context, this means first a set of specific specialized disciplines. So, disciplines like English literature or languages or philosophy or classics, sometimes history, depending on the school. But at the same time, in our American context, we also refer by liberal arts or humanities to something a little murkier. We might say it's that thing in the education of American college students that makes it unique compared to, say, European models of higher education by offering its students that liberal arts education. In practice, this means that in addition to their major or concentration requirements, so this is the same as any undergraduate in the world would have, whatever would qualify them as a holder of an undergraduate degree in their discipline, American college students must meet an independent set of requirements in other fields. And this takes the form of anything from the University of Chicago's Common Core to the sort of general education requirements of the large public universities. So, what I'd like us to start with is by having you, Jen, tell us a little bit about how we got to this place. And then perhaps we can move on to you talking about how do you see the relationship between these two things I said when we say liberal arts or humanities we refer to.
Okay, so I could talk all night about the history of higher education in the US. I'm not going to do that, but I'll just give you like a really quick and dirty version of what happened. Um, Look, in the late 17th century, right, you start to have institutions of higher education in the United States, and they're all small liberal arts colleges. They're all private. Um, and it is very intentional for these institutions that it be about what the Germans would call Bildung or what the Greeks would call paideia. It's about formation of leaders, right? And your course of study was liberal in the sense that it wasn't for the sake of some specific trade or line of work, but it was really about forming you into a free person and citizen. So non-accidentally, in all of these institutions, your capstone senior courses, which were all taught by the university president, were in moral philosophy or moral theology. And, your course of study was entirely prescribed, right? So you're learning classic languages, classic literature, history, philosophy, this sort of thing. You're obviously learning your Greek and Latin. There is a sea change in higher education in the 19th century. And to make a long and complicated story short, the federal government gets involved, right, with land grant universities but the more fundamental change is that we decide that we need to be like the Germans, right? So we have the German Research University as a model. And things start to switch. So the lecture becomes the primary modality of learning, right? So you sit quietly and listen to your professor profess. And specialized disciplinary knowledge becomes the thing that the university is about rather than general liberal education. And non-accidentally, around the same time, what you have is the balkanization of knowledge into specialized departments. you also have general education becoming mostly elective, right? So maybe there are some like categories you have to fill. But by and large, and this started with Harvard, and everybody wants to be like Harvard, so it just kind of proliferated from there. The idea was the students' passions and interests, should be determinative. And you just study what you want, right? So whatever floats your boat. Um, and by the time you get to the 20th century, right, you have things like the Higher Education Act of 1965, where the state really gets involved in higher education. And you also have kind of a landscape in which hyper specialization becomes a norm. And if you look at what happens to so-called general education, undergraduate education, outside of disciplinary knowledge, right? So outside of the major, what happens in general education is that it's by and large transferred over to graduate students, to non-tenured professors or adjuncts of a variety of kinds. It's an afterthought, right? Because what's really going to move you up in the ranking in the Carnegie system, it's research dollars, it's research outputs. Um, we have the birth of the knowledge worker, right? How are professors hired or fired? It's based on their knowledge productivity. I'm a knowledge worker in a knowledge economy. Um, and this is the thing that really interests me as a philosopher, is that the sort of gold standard, the epistemic norm, is expertise, right? So it's no longer wisdom, or something broader that everyone is thought to need, right? It's balkanized, completely siloed forms of expertise. That's the university, right? That we all, if you're an academic, that's the university in which you live and move and make your living. And I think I personally, again, as a philosopher, think that that sort of situation hasn't been great for philosophy. It's unclear why more than a very small minority will need expertise in metaphysics or the things that philosophers work on. But similarly, right, for other humanistic disciplines, and like let's go back to Harvard, less than 7% of incoming freshmen at Harvard will major in any humanities, any single one of them. How can that be? Well, I think a lot of it obviously comes down to the fact that we are told that education is for work, it is for career. Um, Philosophy looks like a bad bet. Actually, empirically, it's not that bad, but prima facie, it looks like a bad bet. But, similarly for other humanistic forms of inquiry. And so, in that space where higher education is no longer, in any meaningful sense, liberal, it's not the sort of education that everyone needs to be a free person and citizen, right? It's just what you need. It's a credential that you need, or a set of skills that you need to get a high paying job. Um, it's really no surprise that the humanities are suffering in that context. I believe that they will continue to suffer until that sort of status quo is disrupted somehow. So I mean, personally, like if I had to put a thesis on the table for us to discuss, it would be that the crisis of the humanities cannot be solved until general education is fixed. And general education should be unapologetically liberal in the strong sense of the education that befits a free person and citizen. And we can talk about what that sort of education might be, but I think we need to get back to the origins of that way of speaking, that there was a difference between a liberal and a servile education. And what marked off a liberal education is that it's an education that is not yoked to some specific trade or line of work, but just makes you free.
Great, Jen. Thank you. I'm very impressed with your ability to condense and, in fact, deliver a very informative, very short lecture on this. So, because we don't have a lot of time for our conversation, let me not follow up in any direct way, but just put to you the following question. How much of that old model of liberal arts that you, I think, would recognize as truly aiming at the liberation of the person and the citizen, how much of that old model should we aim to preserve? And how much of it can we preserve today?
So I okay, so how much? That's a hard question to answer, but let me just say this. I think that when we think about general education, what we think everyone in an institution of higher education needs to study, whatever it is that we come up with there, we need to be thinking about what is it that is going to make them wise, right? So if we think of higher education, we shouldn't be thinking just in terms of higher in its cost or higher in years, like, oh, it's your 13th year, it's your 14th year of education, it's higher. No, we have to be thinking in terms of kind of your highest aspirations as a human person. And to me, that means that you need to be searching for something more than expertise. You need to be searching for wisdom. Why do you need to be searching for that? Well, because you have to live when you graduate, right? You have to make choices. Uh, you have to be a person. And it turns out that systematic, serious reflection on what it means to be a human person and a citizen and to live right as a tiny thing in the vast cosmos is something that you need to have like a grip on. And so I have my own, like, very particular ideas about what course of study might help you with that. But I just sort of, as like a framing mechanism, think that we need to be thinking in that way. And we are absolutely not thinking in that way. I can tell you how we think when it comes to general education. Every balkanized department is just thinking how they can benefit from whatever the system is, right? Nobody's actually thinking about the student because nobody's incentivized to think about the student. And quite frankly, nobody even really knows how to think about the student. The student is like an abstract unit right over there. I want my department to survive. I mean, kind of the irony is the more that we just think in terms of the English department or the philosophy department or whatever, the less likely it is the case that those departments are going to flourish. When we think about general education, we need to be thinking about the student and what is it that we actually think the student needs to know. I would suggest the student doesn't need to know how to do scholarship in any of these fields, right? Like they don't need to know how to like publish or be up on the latest literature or analytic methods or whatever. They need to know how to think and reflect and communicate in a serious and disciplined way. They need to know how to write, not merely, again, as a skill, although there is a skill and a craft there, but they need to learn how to write as a way of expressing how they have learned to think about things that actually matter to them as human beings and citizens. And so, like, to me, we just need to fundamentally rethink, reorient general education. It's obvious to me that the humanities are going to have an important role to play there. I think we've abnegated that role. And we should reclaim it as rightfully ours, but we need to reclaim it outside the kind of conceptual apparatus of disciplinary expertise and think about what real deep liberal learning actually is.
I want to ask you to put another thing on the table. I have heard you say that disciplinary expertise has been horrible for the humanities, and it's a thesis that you've been beginning to unfold for us here today. Focusing just on disciplinary expertise, which is to say, not the kind of education of free human beings and citizens that we're talking about. Do you think that disciplinary expertise in the humanities has a role to play in general, vis-a-vis that special liberal education that you want to see? Or do you think that the condition of success in of the humanities in a real sense means undoing the idea of disciplinary expertise in the humanities altogether?
So I don't want to completely get rid of disciplinary expertise. I just want to put it in its place. I just think it's a fact that it's been bad for the humanities. I mean, we just have real data on this. Most papers in the humanities are read by literally no one. They're read by literally no one, and they're cited by no one. So whatever new knowledge you're producing, it's not really making a dent in anything. And I'm not saying, I mean, look, it's still knowledge, it's good in itself, yada, yada, yada. I don't deny that. But we need to put it in its place. Um, and that means that we need to understand ourselves as teachers, not only as experts, right? Because if you're the expert in the room, then really like most questions should just be settled by you. Right? Be what Aristotle said, ask me, I'm the expert, right? Um, that's a terrible model for the humanities, right? What our students need isn't an expert who can just convey information. Frankly, we're entering a world where artificial intelligence could probably do that pretty well. If you just want information delivery services, probably better models than human beings for that. What we really need is a space where we are actually forming students. And that means a space where they can enter into a conversation that is much bigger than themselves and that lots is at stake in, that they learn how to enter that conversation in a deep and serious way, that they learn the habits of thinking and reflecting with other people. And those, I think, are not merely intellectual habits. They're actually moral habits required for conversation about difficult, contested topics to go well. Um, and we ought to really think about undergraduate education as forming people to be able to do that. Why? Um, because that's how they're going to flourish as human beings, right? And we should really reclaim our job as doing that. I recently reread Stanley Fish's Save the World on Your Own Time, and it it really just is such a perfect example of everything that I think is wrong with higher education. The idea that, we're just us experts. I can just teach you not philosophy. I can't really teach you philosophy. I can teach you like the little lane in philosophy that I managed to know. And like maybe you need to know that or maybe you don't, but like that's what we do. And if you want to worry about how to live or what kind of person to be, that's your parents' job or that's the church's job, but it's not the university's job. And while I agree that it's not the university's job to tell you how to live, it is the professor's unique privilege to help you figure out who you are and how you ought to live in, again, a serious way. And the fact that Fish is totally ignorant of or just doesn't care about the fact that for the vast majority of the history of the university, that was its self-conception. And this conception of disciplinary expertise is actually quite new. Um, that's a question for him. I don't know how he would answer that. But for me, again, the status quo in academia is really not worth preserving. It's bad for philosophy. It's stifling for me as a philosopher. The reason that I kind of became me is because I did have professors who helped me enter that kind of great conversation. Um, and we really need most professors to be able to help their students do precisely that, but we're not trained to do that. We don't seem to care about it. In fact, we think it sort of reeks of charlatanism, or demagoguery. And I think that's really to our discredit. It also discredits like the vast majority of testimony that we have, historical, contemporary, of students who, when they really do receive a truly liberal education, are transformed. What's up with that? What's the explanation of that? Why do we not care about that? And not to just pick on fish, right? I think fish really is an exemplar of something much broader. And there are other instances of it. You can think of Lou Manon in The New Yorker, who sort of is at turns perplexed and bemused and annoyed at someone like Roosevelt Montas, who says, hey, like my liberal education like lifted me up out of poverty on several different levels, not just material poverty, but spiritual poverty. And I'm deeply invested in this sort of soul craft, right? And, Manon just takes the most condescending possible view to that. And my question is, why? Who does that serve? Like who is that really serving?
Okay, thank you, Jen. Let me, to follow up on that, I'm going to quote you to yourself one more time before I turn to the audience. I heard you say recently that the contemporary university is the place where authentic liberal education is least likely to thrive. So we've been talking about all these oughts and shoulds to the university, but at the same time, we've actually been talking about so much that has happened both historically, um, kind of on the level of our ideals and values and capacity to even understand the significance of the humanities. And we're talking about the very real, sort of recent example, one of many of the ways in which universities are very actively turning their backs to the possibility of authentic liberal education. So, my question is, why should we think that the university is where we should be fighting for authentic liberal education? Do you think it can be revived within universities? What would it take for that to happen? And if, as your own experience at Tulsa might suggest, the university is either not the place for this anymore, or at least not reliably the place for that authentic liberal education anymore, can it take place anywhere else?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just kind of depends these days what mood you catch me in. If I'm in like a hopeful, optimistic mood, I'm like, yes, of course, like all we need are the great administrators and et cetera. And we can do this, or all we need to show is that it works. Like I did that and it was still a disaster. So like I'm a bit chastened by reality. Um, I guess I would say for me personally, um, I came to the university when I was 18, and it just changed my life. It changed me. It changed the imaginative possibilities that I could have for myself. And I just want that for other people. I didn't I came to the university like a very smart idiot. Like I was a very smart idiot. And I received a real education. I just want to call universities back to their purpose. I think it would be enormously devastating if we gave up on them. And so I don't want to do that. Is it going to work out? I don't know. Things are bad. Like, and not just in our universities, like things are bad all over. Um, but I just sort of feel like you just can't give up. You just have to fight for the good that you know is there, and that's all you can do. So for me, like I can't give up on our universities. It's been my entire adult life in these institutions. And in some deep sense, I love the university. It doesn't always love me back, but I love the university. And so I'm going to keep fighting. However, having said that, of course, liberal education existed before universities, and it will exist after universities, and it will exist because it addresses a fundamental human need. But it just would be like a crime if our universities like just walked away from it entirely. So I hope that they won't.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jen. With that, I'd like to open the floor to anyone. I see some hands. I'm gonna maybe let Colby Jackson pose the first question. If here you are, Colby, and then if you could just introduce yourself and say in a line what brings you here today, if you'd like. Please feel welcome to do so. And I'm not going to say that again, but that's true of anyone asking a question. Please, you can just tell us where are you coming from in this space, if at all, and where it brings you here today.
Yeah, love it. Thanks for being here, y'all. I guess quick background. I was exposed to like the liberal arts. Well, did like an undergrad in engineering and then a grad degree in philosophy, and now I work in like VC tech world. And so it's like loved it for the time, and it has nothing to do with my daily life, but it like makes my life better, which is a lovely thing. The I guess the question that this sounds so niche, but I think it's somewhat meaningful. Like, is the continuation of what's happening right now, or is what's happening right now in education, has anything meaningfully changed in the past 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years? Or is this just like the arc that we've been on for the past century that is specialization and is the move away from shared knowledge? Um, yeah, I guess I'll just leave it kind of there. Is what you've experienced distinctly new, or is it just the continuation of trend that we've been on?
Um, so I think what I'm inclined to say is that in 2008, which was the Great Recession, um, a certain kind of rot that had been there was finally exposed. Because what happened in 2008 is that our universities were publicly defunded, and also just suffered from the general financial collapse that the entire nation suffered from. And what we saw in response to that was universities needed to make decisions about what they really valued, and it was never the humanities. And that just continues, right? It continues since then. Um, and so the question is, when you have to make a value judgment, because every budget decision is really reflects a value judgment, why is it that the humanities aren't valued? And I believe that's because universities are no longer committed to liberal education in any meaningful sense. And until they recommit, it will continue to be the case that as soon as things need to be cut, you will cut the expendables, right? And if you think that classics and philosophy and things like this, and to be fair to administrators, they will say, well, it's low enrollments, there's no revenues, I mean, classics are nice, but like they're not bringing in any money. Um, again, I think that the people who have the most power in the university need to reflect more deeply on the ways that they are responsible for the fact that no one studies classics anymore. You can't say to someone, we won't tell anyone, like, especially a discipline that's quite difficult, as classics is. You can't say, well, we've in no way communicated your value to anyone. We've in no way meaningfully supported you. And now you don't have students, so we're going to cut you off. I think that's, yeah, I mean, I think that is exactly the way that it looks. So I would say this is all part of a continuous trend. And if we had more time, I could say more about the depths of those trends. But I just think a lot of chickens are coming home to roost now. Yeah.
So I'll do something that's very hard for me to do, which is I'll say that I can already see that there are so many questions, and I know every question and comment from you, Jen, kind of leads to two more. So I'm going to make one request, which is in the answers, or if anybody's making a comment, we'll try and make them succinct just so we can put as much as we can on the table. And if we go through everyone, we can come back and go into further depth into our various topics.
I'm going to try
So
to make the answer shorter.
I find it's very disgusting to have to say that, but it's only in the interest of being able to put more and more aspects of this very difficult question on the table. So with that, I wonder if I can, we can have the question from Rachel Peters. And if you don't mind, Jen, before you answer, perhaps I'll just broaden her question just a little bit. So, Rachel, if you would like to share with us.
Rachel Peters here. I have two kids that are college age and high school, and I'm always wondering, when they hit high school, they're in civics class, they're reading the Bill of Rights. I'm like, whoa, 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 back up here, and I'm thinking like, this is a very radical thing. But the context is lost, and like before you even talk about, the Bill of Rights or how our government is structured, you have to think. Well, what is government? Like, isn't that a very basic question? So I'm wondering if there's could be very large benefits accrued to kids, that are younger than undergrads.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, so kind of one of my side projects in life has been getting involved in the K through 12 classical education space, and rethinking a lot of the problems in higher ed are inherited from the K through 12 space. And depending on what sort of institution of higher education you're in, you'll see different aspects of that problem. But I think that K through 12 education, the status quo there is also not worth defending in any way, shape, or form, and really, really needs to be fundamentally reassessed. Um, but until we manage that, right, we have to kind of inherit, the product of that system that we inherit. And this is why I like to go back to the claim that like I was a very smart idiot when I entered university, because I was, I had been in gifted and talented classes since first grade, and I did all AP and yada, yada, yada. And I knew almost nothing interesting, honestly. And once I started to kind of see how vast, right? How vast the space of what I didn't know and didn't even know I should know was. At first I was like kind of horrified, but then I was like, oh my gosh, I really want to know all this stuff. But yeah, I mean, the idea that in high school someone would have posed any kind of philosophical question to me never happened. It never happened. We just didn't, it's just not the way we were taught. And so I think we're inheriting a lot of problems there. Yes.
I'm wondering, Jen, do you think, in addition to the kind of preparatory necessary work that you are discussing now, when we talk about grade school education, high school education in particular, are there other kinds of complementary institutional reforms that you think have to happen, or any kind of things that don't have to do with how we run a university, but in larger in society that you think would either help us recover the right place for liberal arts education in universities, or conditions of it?
Well, I mean, I think fundamentally we have to reorient our conception of what education is. Education is formation, it's not training. Education is formation. It really doesn't matter to me what stage your education is. It's formation, and unfortunately, through a variety of complicated reasons, we've started to see education as just training. And whatever formation is that happens somewhere else. You know, I just think we've kind of lost our sense of what education even is. And of course, I have many issues, right, with what's happening in schools of education. I mean, my son is in training right now to be an educator, elementary education. And you look at sort of like what he has to do to get credentialed. And yeah, I'm not really on board with most of it, if I'm honest. So I think there needs to be like a bigger fundamental shift. Please don't ask me how to accomplish that. I'm a philosopher. I've no idea.
Okay. Can we hear from Jennifer Punt, who I know been active in several of these topics in the chat, but Jennifer.
Um, Hi, pretty shy. Scientist, but with two daughters who are deeply involved in humanities. And just as you said, Jen, my whole life changed in university because of my exposure to a real liberal arts education. And so I've been a professor, and my colleagues sometimes leave the sciences out of a discussion of liberal arts and of general education, which I find really sad.
Yeah.
Because it is a different way of knowing. So I'd love to know how you perceive the sciences and their role in general education.
Yeah, thank you so much. So this was something so I actually really kind of liked being an administrator. I hate admitting that, but it's true. And one of the joys of starting a new college and really working on curriculum was sitting down with professors who were like into it, you know. And that was like a small section of professors, but the professors who were into it were really into it. And that was a fair number of what I would call people in STEM, you know. So it included mathematicians, but also physicists and biologists and people like this. And we would sit down. Sometimes we would sit down once a week for an entire semester, and we would talk about what a liberal education in that science would look like. And the reason that we did that is because, you know, I was trying to grow this honors college. And I was like, hey, we have this great books core. It's amazing. But like, we need to have honors classes really in every college. And those classes need to be liberal. And I had the most amazing conversations with physicists, with biologists, with mathematicians about one, like how excited they would be to do that. And two, like all their ideas. Like they just had so many ideas. And I would say that the thing that was in common, you know, across disciplines was not just learning a technique, but like asking the fundamental questions about the discipline, which interestingly, they had all done, right? They had all reflected on these fundamental questions and like really wanted to do that with students, but were never given an opportunity to do it. So for example, in biology, like the thing that's never taught is like, what is life? Like what actually is life? Which is a difficult question, actually. Once you start thinking about it, it's not so clear what life is. And then similarly in physics, physics, it's like easy because once you get it gets into shades into metaphysics really quickly, but they were also very interested in studying like the classical texts of their field. So talking again to biologists, like really wanting to study Darwin with their students, which again, they never get to do, but like integrating it into a biology class. So I think those were really valuable conversations. I don't think there's like any one way to do it, but I think when you're thinking about how to do it, you're thinking about how to turn the class into a form of like knowledge for its own sake and like deep, serious reflection on whatever the discipline is. And so getting away from like mere technique and going into sort of more foundational stuff.
Thank you. Alina?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this very exciting conversation. I'm an associate professor of French at Wayne State University in Detroit, and I wear an administrative hat too. I'm the associate director of the Humanities Center of the same university. And I'm proud to say I'm a part of a department that still puts students first, and we struggle with the big questions. And the role of education, I completely agree, is to help our students think and write and be able to make good choices in life after they finish a university education. But we are struggling with low enrollments, and I know that's unfortunately a trend across the country in the humanities. And we are being squeezed constantly because of the low enrollments. And I'm wondering if you can offer any practical solutions, how to convince administrators, deans, the provost, of the value of humanities education. And people at administration seem to acknowledge that there is intrinsic value in the humanities, but when it comes to the curriculum and the support, the real support that's there for the humanities, it's not there because our numbers are low, and the initiatives that come from the administration are sort of like just focused on training, on college to career, and we are not R1, we are not a vocational school, and we try to remind them of that. But they listen, but there are no substantive changes at the curriculum or no real support. So that I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's tough. And I'm very well aware of the problem that you're talking about. I think, if you think about the way that power is like held and exercised in higher education now, it's very hierarchical and very top down. And most of the power is held by deans, but even deans, right, are very limited by what their provost like is wanting, and the provost is responding to a board and a president, and that is like a fundamental reality. I think I would really recommend like having a serious talk with your dean about enrollments and about how to strategize as a department around I'm not sure what general education looks like at your university, but I think general education is the best way for a department such as yours to get a real foothold. And because I do think that deans are always impressed when a department actually is strategizing, right? Because they sort of have this idea that faculty they're just in it for themselves and they don't ever think about the bigger picture. And so I would really recommend talking to the dean and also trying to think strategically as a department. I have definitely seen low major departments thrive when they can really situate themselves such that they are serving the university. So they get, they don't have a lot of majors, but all their classes are filled, right? Regardless. So I think there is work to be done now. However, I also think that when you're relegated to being a service department, right, you're still going to be second fiddle to the big research departments. And so, again, we also need, as faculty, to really be pressuring administrators to think seriously about the fact that they're not just managers, they're not just middle managers, but we're supposed to be educators. And so I really, again, think that we need to push back against a completely elective system and think about, well, what is really the value here um, of, whatever it is that we're offering.
I think at this point, maybe it'd be productive to hear from Sean Doolin as a kind of follow-up to exactly this exchange.
Hi, Jen. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
My question is, I feel like if
Do you guys
I
know
could,
each other?
You do.
yes, we've met several times. Yeah.
It's actually
I-
it's a way of asking you, Sean, to introduce yourself.
oh, sorry. I'm Sean. I live in Washington, D.C. I work at a think tank here. Some of my work touches on the future of the humanities in higher ed. So I'm also broadly interested in the humanities. So I have an interest in their future.
Nice.
My question is if I feel like I can glean anything from either your story, Jen, or stories of people like you, it's that it's very difficult to convince consumers of the value of the humanities. And I'm wondering why, I'm wondering whether, at least initially, the suppression of some consumer preferences will be necessary in order to advance the our kind of our favored form of education.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you. Yeah. So, do we need to suppress consumer preferences? Yes. Because if our model of education is based on consumer preference, like we're just not educating. I mean, I'm sorry. Um, but secondly, I will just say that I actually don't think it's that hard to sell people on a liberal education. That's not been my experience, actually. My privilege as a dean is that I was put in front of students all the time, all the time. By contrast to when I was a philosophy professor, in which case I was literally never put in front of students, ever. Um, and it turned out when I was put in front of students and parents, they were captivated. They were absolutely captivated. So we have to ask ourselves, how are we doing recruitment? Who is getting put in front of the consumer, and why is it them and not someone else? And how can we calibrate like our pitch? And I think for me, again, I have a very old-fashioned view, and I was like very upfront about it. And I would also tell people like it's really hard, like it's not easy. But I would also tell them that everything was at stake in doing it. And that got their attention because no one's telling them that. No one's telling them that everything's at stake in the doing of it. What people are saying is, oh, you might study this, you might study that. Who knows? It's up to you to figure it out, right? Which is very much the Stanley Fish model, right? It's like, oh, you could study a million things. The point is just that you study something. Um, I think what we need to expose is this idea that an 18-year-old really knows what they're supposed to study. I didn't. I actually didn't even know that philosophy existed. I like if you had asked me in high school, I would have said, "Oh, that was like a thing, like in ancient Greece, maybe." I don't know what happened to it after that. Um, and it just so happens, by the grace of God, that I got put into a philosophy class because it fulfilled something and it was like all that was left over or whatever. Um, and, that's how I ended up knowing that philosophy was even a thing that still happened. So I think consumers do respond when they actually learn what it is, but the trouble is they're not learning what it is, and so they're not responding. Now, is everybody going to respond? Of course not, right? But in my experience, the majority of people do. And so, we should create those conditions where people are sort of getting the full Monty, as it were, for liberal learning.
Okay, I'm gonna do my mid-salon reminder that we have, again, the list is only growing. And so I'm gonna ask us all to keep that in mind as we give our
When
fascinating
does this
answers.
end? I have no idea, actually.
6:30. So
Oh,
6:30.
okay. Okay.
We're going for
Great.
90 minutes in total.
Okay, great.
And I would like to hear from Stella, who I've
I'm
seen in the
Stella.
chat. Hi, Stella.
Hi.
I recently graduated from Swarthmore College, great liberal arts school, a little over a year ago. And I have just started a PhD in philosophy at NYU. Um, and so I loved liberal arts, loved my time at Swarthmore, and like very directly led me to the PhD. But I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about what a liberal education would look like that isn't oriented towards academia. I know from my time at Swarthmore, like all of my favorite classes were both the ones that felt the most liberal, as like we are just considering a lot of different ideas about moral philosophy, political philosophy, how should we live, um, how do we work through an argument. And I feel like that's exactly why I wanted to go study for longer and maybe be a professor. And I think part of the motivation for this is, well, a ton of my friends are already in grad school after just 1 year out of college. And I have some strong instincts about, the practical life is a very virtuous life. And it would be kind of a shame if a true liberal education only leads us into the academy rather than towards other flourishing. So I'm just struggling a little bit to imagine what does the class look like? Like, what do you read? How does conversation go? Is it lecture versus discussion? Like that kind of thing about
Yeah,
these
yeah.
classes.
Thank you. Yeah, so I agree that philosophy should not be ordered just to getting people into NYU, right? Like that should not be how philosophy functions, because very few people are going to need a PhD in philosophy, right? Or even want one, right? And so I think that, and this is the thing that I want to resist. I want to resist the teaching of philosophy as a pre-professionalizing endeavor. Um, and it wasn't that way when I was an undergrad. Now, I knew pretty early on that I wanted to go to grad school, which meant that I had to go to my professors and be like, I want to go to grad school. Somebody help me get there, right? They did, right? But that wasn't the way it was taught at all. I actually think I had like a completely amazing undergraduate education, um, in that the philosophy classes were small and freewheeling, and like we had this department where it was amazingly comprehensive and also eclectic, and you could do hardcore logic, or you could do philosophy of literature. You could learn Hegel, you could learn Sellers and Quine. I mean, it just was all over the place. And that was wonderful for me. Um, but very, very few of us went on to get a PhD in philosophy, like very few of us. And
Jen, may I just because I saw Stella, the way she wrote her question in the chat, could you be concrete? Like, what is the difference between a class that is oriented, as I think a lot of the classes I'm familiar with too, are oriented towards exactly the kind of exercise that one would have to do in grad school, versus perhaps the kind of classes that you were constructing at Tulsa? I've heard you talk about those classes. So, we have a class on Aristotle at NYU undergrad, and we have a class that you're imagining where you're saying we're not training people to be little philosophy professors. what would be the difference?
Well, I think the difference is if you're training someone to be a scholar in a discipline, you're training them to create scholarship, right? And so they have to know what the top journals are and what the kind of practices are. They have to learn. I mean, the fundamental thing they have to learn is how to narrow their thinking. Narrowing your thinking, I think, is done in graduate school. And even then, I think it should only be done in basically the third year of graduate school, at least for philosophy. What you want as an undergrad is broadness of thinking. And so yeah, I mean, I was in a space where that was possible and encouraged. I didn't create real scholarship as an undergrad. And that's great because I didn't need to do that. However, because I had gone to my professors and said, I really want to go to grad school, and also I was in an honors program. When it came time to write my honors thesis, like that was scholarship. And because of my classics background and my medieval studies background, I was really teed up to write the sort of scholarship that I ended up writing, which was on Augustine. But really, like the benefit for me was having a very broad humanistic education that allowed me to basically triple major. And then you can go on and specialize in graduate school when you're like, no, I actually want to be an academic. And so, of course, I do have to create like Wissenschaft. In terms of what we were doing at Tulsa, it was reading a ton of like great books. And we did not do secondary literature. We did not have the professor lecturing or being an expert. The professor would just, like in St. John's style, just ask some questions. Like that was it. And the whole thing was like a dialogue. And you never really knew where it was going to go. It would go, you would teach the same material to different classes and it would go in wildly different places. Because the point was for them to be able to initiate and carry on like a very serious, sophisticated conversation about big ideas, right? And to give them the confidence and ability to keep having that conversation outside the classroom. Like that was the big thing that we wanted them to be able to do. Um, that's a very different sort of enterprise.
Okay, thank you so much. And I want to hear from Trey Daniel. And I know you have various questions and comments. I'll ask you to ask the one that is most burning.
I'll go with the most recent. You mentioned Stanley Fish's book. Are there any other sources you would recommend along those lines that talks about the problems in university and the changes that need to be made? And then a follow-up to that, which is adjacent. You just mentioned St. John's program that I think everybody knows about, but I know of one at Clemson and Florida was starting one, but then the president left or whatever. I don't know if it's still happening. But are there any other programs that currently exist today that, based on quality and size, that you would say are notable or
Yeah, so I think so actually Swarthmore was the first honors program in the United States, and it started out as great books. I don't know what it is now. There's Columbia Core, there's Chicago Core, which I taught in. There's St. John's, there's Lyceum. There are like these pockets. There's Baylor, Baylor Great Techs, Baylor Honors. There are these pockets, right, of liberal learning, but they're not the norm. In fact, there's like a running list that I have somewhere, Bard, Reed, places like that that still have some kind of general education that's like actually systematic and the same for everyone. But what you'll get in most places is the kind of buffet cafeteria style. You've got 5 food groups, go find a course for each food group sort of thing. But yeah, there are definitely people doing the work.
And then on the first one, I know there was a question about texts that either kind of help us understand the moment better or represent one of the ideologies.
Oh,
This
yeah.
is the
Okay.
case with fish.
So, a text that I would really recommend is Chad Wellman's Permanent Crisis.
Mhm.
I think it's really just fabulous. And there's also a book called Wisdom's Workshop. I can't remember who wrote that. I'm sorry. But it's a really great, just general, highly readable and engaging general history of higher education in the US. Yeah, I mean,
Great.
I'm currently writing a book on universities, so I'm like really deep in it. But those two are super great.
I see a quick question from Shanji, and I want to make sure he gets the chance to ask it. Shanji?
Yeah, hi.
Hey.
Also, Zena Hitz says Lost in Thought before I forget. So good. It's not really about how we got to where we are, but it's such a good diagnosis of the problem.
Let me
Sorry, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we can hear you.
Go ahead.
Hey, okay, good. Sorry, I just headphones died at the wrong moment. Jen, it's just a quick question. I was reading through your the New York Times piece. So I teach high school. I'm lucky enough to teach philosophy at high school. I'm in Ottawa, Canada,
Oh, that's awesome.
and I'm really curious when you talk so highly about the texts that you were, or the pieces that you were giving to them, and it sounds amazing. And I was just wondering, just selfishly as a teacher, I was just like, oh, I would love to know maybe if there's something that stood out as being like you really looked forward to discussing a certain work or a certain piece with them because you knew it was going to rile them up in a good way. So I just thought I'd pick your brain a little bit for ideas about engaging sort of, you know, kids that we're kind of talking about here. I have students who are off to university the next year, and the way
Yep.
our system is set up, that I've got math kids and English kids and music kids and everyone in that room in grade 12. So it's kind of, I really like it, and I would love any ideas about, yeah, material that you think is engaging.
So we had summer programs for high school students. So we had kind of like a modified curriculum for high school students, and I would say that they absolutely love Greek tragedy. They love it. They also love Plato. The Apology. I mean, they just get into that. Like we always started with the Apology, and they just it's incredible, right?
Yeah,
Because people always say like, "Oh, these kids don't want to read, they don't care." That was not my experience, you
yeah,
know. And the apology is kind of bite-sized enough, and there's
yeah,
just so much to talk about. And I mean, it just he gives you everything
yeah.
there, right? And also like, they kill him, so I
Yeah,
think
we
it's
start with that. We start with a few different pieces of the dialogues. One thing that I accidentally kind of realized worked really well was Aristotle's thoughts on friendship are really, really interesting for them.
yeah, yeah.
And they see it as cold-hearted at first, but then we go through it and they're like, oh, okay, I guess he's not maybe sort of dismissing these types of friendships, but yeah, just anything maybe, yeah,
We also did like sections of the Republic. We obviously didn't do the entire Republic. And Gorgias, really good. They love the Gorgias.
yeah,
Gorgias is good. But I mean, we would look at kind of famous speeches and things like this. I mean, it was a systematic, and I would actually, if you email me, I'd be happy to send you
okay,
our curriculum for high school students.
yeah, I will.
But I would say that for me, one of the most exciting things that we did was the programming for high school students. It just really was so much fun. It was a blast.
And if I may, Jen, I would like to share that in preparation for this, I read an article that you wrote recently. You gave us a lecture about the university, and you were talking about the vision of the University of Cardinal Newman versus Weber's that you then
Yeah.
see incarnated in Fish. It's an incredible article. I'm going to be trying to get you to give it to the point, parenthetically. But if not, if you see it elsewhere, you should read it. But one of the things that really were made clear to me by reading that and combined with things that I've heard you say is that there are texts that are great. You're very partial to not giving up on Aristotle and Plato, but in a fundamental sense, the texts are quote unquote replaceable. And they're replaceable not because they're not each unique and valuable. They're replaceable because what's so unique about the approach that you're recommending and trying to get us to see is not a specific set of content that one book would have versus another, but is rather reading at all with a view to the question of how should I live? With the background assumption that reading and engaging with this text, with these texts that are incredibly influential, and important could have something to teach us. So perhaps the text that would work with a middle schooler is different than the one that would capture a high schooler is different than the one that you would do with an advanced undergrad. But that was something that really stuck with me. Is this idea that we shouldn't be so anxious about the text that we read, but should be really careful about the approach. So we're not approaching a text thinking, well, kids, we're going to find out what Plato thought and move on, but we're going to be trying to figure out how we should lead our lives with Plato's help. So I just wanted to just kind of in response to Shanji's provocation to bring that out, which I think was very helpful for me. Does that sound right?
It's so true because I mean, look, I'll defend the canon, but I also think that what's really, really important isn't, whether you read the Republic or the Symposium or the Mino or whatever. But just that, and because I'm also just very committed to faculty governance in the sense that faculty really need to be the voices about what they're teaching. But I just think what's really important to me is how you teach, because anyone can make Plato boring. They just can. And the way that you make Plato boring and distant and alienated is just like standing in front of the room as the Plato expert and just being like, with a PowerPoint. I don't think there's anything especially liberal about that sort of education. I think that you have to kind of engage in this dialectical exchange with students, and you have to help them do it well because they're not going to do it well in the beginning. And it's actually going to be kind of a mess. And really, I would say the sense in which you're an expert in the room is you're an expert at having those kinds of deep and important conversations, and they're not. But you have to invite them in and help them become the person who can have those sorts of conversations. There's so much formation going on in that initiation process. Again, if it's just content delivery.
So with a few minutes on the clock, I want to hear I have a question from Joanna Flynn and then from Stephen Maley. And if there's anyone whose question I missed, if you could just please flag it in the chat and I will try and get it in. And Anna, I see you as well. So let's start with Joanna.
Okay, this is a really quick one, I think. So I'm here from UNC Chapel Hill, where I teach in the history department, and then I also work with a lot of community colleges doing public humanities work. And this question is especially with them in mind, which is about the cost of higher ed. So I'm at a point where I don't want to get people into my history class by telling them it will get them a job. I want to have those values conversations about how this will help them to live. But that's a really hard conversation to have with someone who is going into extraordinary debt for this education, or for someone for whom a lot is actually riding on their earning potential on the other side of this. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that kind of hard obstacle of what seems to be just the inescapably rising cost of higher ed.
Yeah, thank you. So this is something that I thought about a lot because, I had to work 32 hours a week as an undergrad and pay for my own college. So I understand. And I also went into debt. So this is something that I feel very deeply. Um, I sort of feel like everyone needs a liberal education. Um, and it does a disservice to those of us who, yeah, have to pay our own way or go into debt to say that, well, for you, merely vocational. Um, I also think this is where I want to double down on general education. Um, General education is for everyone, regardless of what you go on to specialize in. And history should have a significant foothold in that, in my opinion. Um, I will also say that higher education is risky for everyone. I mean, and a merely vocational approach really doesn't work out, right? I mean, just take the most recent example of computer science majors, right? We told everyone for 12 years to major in computer science and they would be rich. Computer science, the job market has totally collapsed. It's totally collapsed. Students from comparable schools to UNC Chapel Hill, so like very good schools who majored in computer science are not getting jobs. So I think your best bet is to get a liberal education where you are not trained just to learn a very specific narrow thing. Those skill sets are constantly changing. Those job markets are in flux. No matter what happens, you still have to be a person. And I think those forms of habituation that you get in real liberal learning are going to serve you well no matter what you go on to specialize in and no matter what kind of job market you try to angle yourself for. Like you just still have to be a person, whether you're rich or poor or somewhere in between, like you still have to be a person. I cannot solve the problem of the skyrocketing costs of higher education. But if you're going to get a higher education, it might as well truly be higher. It might as well truly be higher.
Thank you, Jen. Kelly Connolly, have I missed a question from you?
Hi there. I think my question is exactly the kind that Jen later said she don't ask me.
Okay.
So I'll be quick, but I teach high school humanities and I'm an occasional adjunct professor. I teach theology and philosophy. And my sense in both places, in like the small local college and in a Catholic high school, the administrators are utterly uninterested in this sort of thing. When I get observed, it's no one cares that I'm talking about Plato's dialogues with high schoolers or whatever. It's just like how I package it, right? And so in both arenas, I've seen the thing implode, and I'm just wondering, how do we get the people who are in charge to see what we see, right? To understand how enormously important this is. And I don't know, it's about conversion. And I don't know that,
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly.
Yes. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if I really knew the answer to that, I wouldn't have been fired, and I was. So, I mean, look, it's a hard problem. It's a hard problem. I think that yeah, it's a hard problem. I mean, I wish I had like one magic trick that was gonna get people to see what a real education is. I don't have that.
Do you think it's fair to say though that the problems that we're seeing today are the result of decades, if not centuries, of development, of historical and kind of ethical, intellectual development. I mean, one thing I think that we can do, it just takes a very long time, is to educate our students in a particular way. If any of our students, any of Jen's students, I won't speak about myself, turn out to be administrators one day, they'll come and observe the next Kelly Connolly in class, and perhaps we'll be able to value her differently. Whether or not there's anything we can do to change the minds of people in the next few years, that perhaps is a different question. Do you think that's fair?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me, yeah, I mean, our students, well, for me, the students are the reason that I wake up and keep doing it. And I think, yeah, I mean, you are planting seeds there, whether they mature in your class or not, you're planting seeds there. And I mean, I guess I sort of take this view that like all I can do and all any one of us can do as an individual is do the work and speak out and articulate the value, and try to draw people into that. And also speak truthfully. You know, when I wrote the piece in the New York Times, I was so overwhelmed. I was so overwhelmed by the response I received. Hundreds and hundreds of emails, and about half of them were from professors saying the same thing happened to me. Right? Like I had this program, the students loved it. It got killed by administrators. And on the one hand, I felt like seen, you know, I was like, oh, like, you know, my people are out there. I'm not alone. And on the other hand, I felt so depressed, so overwhelmingly depressed by the absolute dire state of education. But I just sort of feel like all we can do is show people the value of it. But what else can you do? Also, if you can get power, get power.
I want to hear, let's have a last audience question from Stephen, and then we'll give the very last question to Anna.
I'm Stefan Meili. I'm originally from Switzerland, where I got my education from, and I dabbled a little bit in philosophy. And then I came to the States and went down the wrong path and worked on Wall Street for the last 25 years. So I have a question about education in the US when it comes to philosophy. We see on the graduate level, there's a fairly significant division between analytic and continental philosophy in the United States, while we don't see that kind of significant difference on the undergrad or liberal education level. Why do you think that's the case? Or can you give us a little bit more flavor how you think about the divide between analytic and continental philosophy on the liberal education or undergrad level?
Yeah, so I think in terms of like how it got to be that way, you just sort of look into university hiring practices, right? And what happens in a department is that, you know, people who are hiring want to hire people that have a similar training and that they can talk to, are engaging a similar set of authorities. And so it's mostly, I think, kind of a sociological divide if you look at the way the departments are structured. I also think that it would be better if that were not the case, right? I think it would be better if philosophy departments hired for depth and breadth rather than how they in fact hire, right? Philosophy departments hire based on how it might help them in various rankings, and how it might make them stand out in terms of being a graduate program. Again, people like literally no one hires for undergraduate education because that's not how our universities function. And so that's how you end up with a kind of, again, excessively narrow. Now, I got very lucky in that I stumbled into a university and a department that, for a variety of reasons, had that depth and breadth. But that was rare. And so the kind of education that I got was rare. And if I look at that department today, that depth and breadth is not there. So yeah.
Is it so? This is fascinating, and when Anna lets us have also a salon about philosophy in its own kind of problems, we could go into further depth. But I want to make sure that we have one last question. So please forgive me for interrupting, and I'll have the last question go to our interintellect founder and patroness, Anna Gutt.
Thank you so much. And I'm so sorry to cause an interruption here. But I'm just so, first of all, it's so interesting because, I'm severely overeducated in the humanities. I hold 3 master's degrees in the humanities from 2 different countries. I clearly had, very little considerations for practical matters when I chose my curriculum, and all I wanted was the higher part of higher education. But today I'm the CEO of this company, Interintellect, that is one of the leading platforms for basically extra curricular, extra university humanities or general education. And we do have STEM people and finance people and humanities people, practical makers kind of converging on this platform. And, Jen, as you were talking about the role of the philosopher, we're kind of reinventing the wheel on Interintellect when we train hosts how to not try to be an expert. Nobody wants ex cathedra. That's not relatable. It kind of makes the audience devolve into mere spectators as opposed to participants. So you need to like Buddha, Socrates, Jesus, sit down with people. They already know you're the leader. Your job is to kind of like narrow the gap. And so the question that I have is, clearly we, Zena Hits, running Catherine Project, myself building Interintellect, and countless other such organizations, we have learned so much from universities. What we got during university education, what we missed, what we lacked. We're trying to kind of be better parents, to our own kids in a weird successive way. And I'm so curious, are universities learning from us? So when you see people, I'm on the internet, on Substack, on Twitter, on Interintellect, on Catherine Project, Next Big Ideas Club, hundreds of thousands of people coming together per year to just talk about the big questions. Even people who, like Stefan, at one point maybe went down the wrong road, wrong, quote unquote, the need is there, and you can see it in how the market works and how people spend their time willingly. Is there something that we might be contributing to universities? And if so, how can we do that more?
Well, there's definitely something that you can be contributing. The question of whether universities are learning from things like Interintellect and Catherine Project, I think it really depends. One of the many problems we have in higher education is a lack of stability within institutions. The average college president right now lasts 4 years. That's really devastating, actually, when you think about it, because the college president has a lot of power. And when you have that much, when I was at the University of South Carolina for 10 years, I went through 6 provosts. Every provost comes in with new
It's like the UK government.
Well, I stopped. It's so funny because the last provost, I didn't even learn her name. I was like, she's got to be here 3 years before I even learn her name. So, it's that kind of institutional overhaul, right? I was brought in under a president who was obsessed with the Catherine Project, who really valued great books. And as soon as he left, we were gone. So I think like it's that internal instability, the fact that, most higher ed administrators are brought from without the institution rather than lifted up from within. There's just a lot of practices that make it difficult to even sustain good things that are started. Because if you kind of look at how you move up in administration, it's like, oh, I started new initiatives. Well, I mean, were they good or bad? Like, are they going to outlast you? Like, did anyone like them? And so I think it's all kind of part of universities. I mean, I guess it's kind of this neoliberal corporatization of universities, where kind of C-suite practices are placed upon universities. I mean, all of this is like deeply questionable. I also don't know how to fix it. I'm sorry. I'm a philosopher and I'm not necessarily good at fixing anything, but so it's hard for me to say like who's learning from this, because someone might be learning from it and try to institute changes and then they're out and God only knows what's coming in. But certainly they ought to be. They ought to be.
I can't imagine this will be the note we will end on. So I will introduce one more question, which is Jen. Can you give us in one line, one thing that makes you hopeful? When you're in a hopeful mood, why is that? And that will be the note on which I insist we end.
The thing that makes me hopeful is students, right? That's the thing that keeps me going, that keeps me full of hope. Students really come to us wanting an education, and it's our duty to give it to them. And when we do actually give it to them, it is life-changing for them. I see that all the time. It's absolutely astonishing and incredible and amazing. And every student in a university deserves that.
So on that note, I feel ready to conclude an absolutely incredible super salon on the question, can the humanities be saved? I am so grateful to everyone who came out here today, who shared their experiences, posted their comments, posed wonderful questions. To Anna, of course, for giving us this opportunity, and first and foremost to Professor Jennifer Frey for speaking to us so insightfully and so candidly. And you have always been a personal inspiration to me, and that only grows with time. And hopefully some of that has been communicated to the rest of you today. So thank you so much.
Everyone. Thanks everyone for coming. Feel free to email me if you have other questions.
Thank you so much. And we're saving the chat. So if you're in the Discord on Interintellect, I'm going to share it in the education channel. I think that's thematically fitting. Thank you so much, and congratulations, Anastasia and Jen, on this beautiful conversation.